Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Former Vice President Joe Biden says he'll be more mindful of people's personal space in the future. This comes after 4 women accused Biden of touching them in ways that made them feel uncomfortable. Here's what Biden said in a video posted to his Twitter account.
Social norms have begun to change, they've shifted, and the boundaries of protecting personal space have been reset. And I get it. I get it. I hear what they're saying. I understand it. And I'll be much more mindful. That's my responsibility. My responsibility, and I'll meet it. But I'll always believe governing, quite frankly, life for that matter, is about connecting with people. That won't change. But I will be more mindful and respectful of people's personal space. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I've worked my whole life to empower women. I've worked my whole life to prevent abuse. I've written, and so the idea that I can't adjust to the fact that personal space is important, more important than it's ever been, is just not thinkable. I will.
Here with me now is CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. She spent the morning at the Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network convention, where several 2020 candidates spoke. Also with us from Washington is Wall Street Journal political reporter Ken Thomas. Thanks to you both for joining us. Ken, I'd like to start with you. Is that response by Joe Biden likely to satisfy his critics?
That's the key question right now. It was the first time he appeared on camera to address these concerns. He had previously only issued a statement. We will see him on Friday. He'll be giving a speech at a union conference here in D.C. But the question is, does this stem the tide? Does this prevent other Democrats from saying publicly that these concerns are so great that Joe Biden should not run, or it should seriously hamper his ability to run for president? The thinking is that he could put these to rest by speaking out, saying he gets it, he understands. The question, though, is will other Democrats come out, but also will other people come out and say they had serious similar issues? Yeah,
Caitlin, at the start of his video statement, Biden says, quote, "Folks, in the coming month, I expect to be talking to you about a whole lot of issues." First of all, is that yet another sign that he is likely going to be entering the race? And also, what about that? Does his camp think that he is now, in effect, weathered this storm?
Well, it certainly seemed like that was the pitch that he was making. We know that he had been preparing for a run, and we kept hearing that sometime in April would be the launch date for this. But we know he's been agonizing over this decision, and the longer that he's been waiting, people have filled that void. You've seen lots of candidates get into the race, and you've also seen lots of voters raise the question about where Biden fits into that. So this is kind of a tricky territory he's been trying to navigate even before all of this came out. I do think this video is an acknowledgement, though, that he had to say something coming from his own, it's something in his own words. We saw his team circulating positive comments from many women who had either worked with him or seen him in the public sphere, vouching for his character. That was very much being pushed out by his team. This was the first time we're seeing him address it head on, and it seemed like he was eager to do so and to move on. The question is whether any other items come out about him, or whether we'll see other candidates start to raise more questions about him.
And on that point, Caitlin, I know you heard directly from some candidates about Joe Biden when you were at the National Action Network conference. What is it that they had to say?
Well, it's interesting because they are very much trying to strike a delicate balance here. They, on one hand, have an affinity for Joe Biden. On the other hand, they're saying we need to believe the women, and these women need to be heard. I spoke to Beto O'Rourke about this, actually, and asked him what he made of the former vice president's allegations against him, and here's what he had to say.
I think we need to listen to those who are raising their stories, who have the courage to come forward, to share their experience, and also to be part of the conversation about either his candidacy or how he fares as a contender for the nomination if he jumps in. So I think ultimately that's going to be a decision for him to make. But I'm glad that people are willing to and have the courage to step up. They must be heard and listened to, and that must all be part of
So it's interesting to hear O'Rourke say that, because he has been talking very positively about Joe Biden. I was with him in New Hampshire, actually, and a voter asked O'Rourke about Joe Biden, and he said, I hope he gets into the race. He's done so much for our party. There you see him kind of striking that balance a little bit, and his sentiments echo many of the others in the field.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear him sort of navigate this issue in real time. Well, Ken, you have an article out with the headline, Joe Biden's Long History Shadows 2020 Bid, where you talk about this issue beyond the touching that could come back to haunt the former VP. Tell us about some of those issues.
Yeah, he has a very long record. He was in the Senate for 36 years. He was President Obama's vice president for 8 years. And so as a result, there are just a number of issues that he's worked on over the years that may seem to be at a step with today's Democratic Party. He, for instance, was the leader of the 1994 crime bill that many African Americans say have led to years of incarceration. He, has led on. He was someone who supported the Iraq War. That's certainly an issue that many Democrats don't support. And so he's going to, and then also his role is on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearing. So he's going to have to answer to these questions and present a forward-looking approach, a forward-looking campaign, even while he'll be someone who will be, in his late 70s. And represent the most established experience in the race.
Yeah, and Ken, do you expect the other Democrats in the race to attack Biden on his record and his past if he does decide to run?
Campaigns are about contrasts, and in a field this large, it's hard to imagine that the other Democrats won't look to, effectively litigate his record if he's the front runner. There's an interesting issue. Elizabeth Warren first got involved in politics in 2005 when she was fighting against a bankruptcy overhaul that Joe Biden was supportive of. And so, I would fully expect Elizabeth Warren to raise that issue, that it was something that hurt many middle-class families. So if the Biden camp thinks that this won't get litigated in a campaign, they're operating under fairly old rules.
Caitlin, it's interesting. One thing that was not in that video that Joe Biden made was an apology or an acknowledgement of any kind of wrongdoing. How do you interpret that? What's your take on that?
It's a really good point, especially since we heard from Nancy Pelosi yesterday saying that he should apologize, and other women in the party saying that that is the step that he should take. It seems like he wanted this video to be an acknowledgement that he recognizes, at least, that the party has shifted. The way in which those who were accusing him of inappropriate behavior, saying that they wanted to have this conversation, and they believed that having this conversation was necessary as they were trying to pick a Democratic presidential nominee in this moment. And it comes against the backdrop of women already making history in the Democratic Party, not only in 2018, but in 2020. You have a record number of women running for office. You have a very diverse field. And as Ken alludes to in his own reporting, there were these questions about where Biden fits in. And I still think those questions will exist. And I also think it's going to be very difficult for him not to engage with people, that retail politics that he does so well and effectively, but that is worrisome to some. I think it's going to be a very difficult challenge for him.
Well, switching gears, Beto O'Rourke, along with his fellow Texan in the race, Julian Castro, voiced support for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's bill to appoint a commission to recommend how to do reparations for slavery. Here are those clips.
There are things that we need to do in this country that have been a long time in coming. One of those is to move forward with reparations. I have said many times during the last several weeks that I've long believed that our country will never truly heal until we address the original sin of slavery. I've said that if under our Constitution that we compensate people if we take their property, why wouldn't we compensate people who were considered property and sanctioned by the state?
Foundational to reparations is the word repair. Foundational to repair is the truth. And until all Americans understand that civil rights are not just those victories that I began with at the outset of my comments, But the injustices that have been visited and continue to be visited on people, we will never get the change that we need to live up to the promise of this country. So absolutely, I would sign that into law. Thank you.
So fascinating, Caitlin, to hear their answers on that. I mean, did you ever think we would reach a point where you would have presidential candidates talking about this issue of reparations?
It is striking how it has become something of a litmus test within the Democratic primary. At this conference I was at this morning where O'Rourke and Castro spoke, this is a room full of civil rights activists. Obviously, Al Sharpton is in charge of it. You have civil rights leaders in the audience and various activists, largely African-American crowd. These issues of criminal justice, of inequality are so high on the Democratic priority list that this is going to be something to watch throughout this primary. African-American voters are going to be a critical constituency during this primary. You're going to see it in states like South Carolina and others, and especially African-American women, who we know have been showing up in higher numbers in some of these special elections and in the midterms, and is a constituency that Democrats say is really kind of starting to become the backbone of the party.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to me because this has been in the past not something that we have heard necessarily on the stump in this way, but here it is right there out in the open. Well, before we head to break, 2 more candidates have released their first quarter fundraising totals. Beto O'Rourke says he's raised more than $9 million in the 18 days since he entered the race, placing him behind only Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris. Ken, what does that figure tell you?
I think the key metric is the number of days in which Beto O'Rourke did that. He's been in the race for 18 days. So, you know, a $500,000 a day clip is a pretty strong pace. We'll see if he can maintain it. But it shows that, you know, there's going to be a lot of opportunities here, and it's a very wide open race. And this is really the first benchmark, the first way to measure these candidates, you know, through fundraising and their ability to raise money online, which is where a lot of this money is coming from.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ken Thomas, thanks to you both.